This is Crime Beat. I'm Officer Don with Fayette Commonwealth's Attorney Ray Larson. We're going to hit on several topics, including hit-and-run accidents, if you want to call them accidents, collisions here in Fayette County. We've had a string of these things here lately, and the legislature has changed the laws concerning hit-and-run collisions. We'll talk about that. Plus the street code of silence and how that is causing us to have some unsolved homicides all over the country, how this so-called street code affects officers and detectives being able to investigate serious crimes. And the Penn State situation. We touched on this a little bit last week. What exactly are the requirements in Kentucky for a person who witnesses a child being abused, sexually abused, or whatever? Do you have a requirement to step up and tell the authorities? We'll touch on those and other topics on In Touch this week. All right, let's start with the hit and runs.
Well, in the last several weeks, Officer Don, there have been 3 hit and run fatalities. Now let's talk about this. Somebody runs into a pedestrian or hits and typically that's what happens in these cases. And then they leave the scene. Now, I guess it was 2008, a young woman at the University of Kentucky, her name was Connie Blunt. She had come to the University of Kentucky from Park City, Utah, and she was part of the award-winning equestrian team at the University of Kentucky. She was run over and killed in the middle of South Broadway and near Maxwell, near that intersection of South Broadway and Maxwell. And the guy that ran over left. Turns out he was in a pickup truck, and they found him, and he was taking the front off of his pickup truck in order to hide the fact that there had been a collision. And so he was charged with tampering with physical evidence. The thing that is so infuriating to the father of Connie Blunt, Jack Blunt, was that leaving the scene of an accident in which somebody's been killed at that time, 2008, was a misdemeanor. So we couldn't, that it's just a misdemeanor.
Misdemeanor's a misdemeanor.
Right.
Why do people leave? This guy ran over a girl. Let's take this guy out of it. But why do they most generally leave the scene?
I want to talk about this guy.
Okay, well, you just hit somebody. You've either hurt or killed them. Why don't you stop and help them? Why do these people leave?
Well, my guess is that they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Now, here's the legislature after the Connie Blunt incident changed the law and made it a felony, a Class D felony. Now, a Class D felony, sentence for conviction of a Class D felony ranges between 1 year and 5 years, you see. If you're convicted of manslaughter in the second degree, the penalty is 5 to 10 years, you see. So if somebody's under the influence, runs over and kills somebody, and leaves the scene, waits for 6 hours to sober up, and then comes back and reports they left the scene, and so they're facing 1 to 5. Whereas if they would have remained, and the officers would have said, "Well, you appear to be under the influence. We're going to take a sample of your blood and we're going to test it," he'll be charged with manslaughter second degree, probably, and that's 5 to 10 years.
So you're still better off to leave the scene.
Well, if you're under the influence, the law basically rewards the person for leaving the scene, and that shouldn't happen.
No, and it's another example of how sometimes when our legislature, they make these laws, they don't look at the whole circumstances. We saw this with a House bill that basically took away police officers' ability to arrest people like peeping toms and people who steal and commit crimes like that. They took away their power to arrest because they didn't want to fill the jails up, they say. But as a result, that's had a serious impact on police officers' ability to police, to keep the community safe, to bring some of these people off the street before they go to the next level with their criminal activity. That's a side effect because they didn't think it through. And we talked to, I talked to a guy who said that part of their reason for that was, well, it got pushed at the last second. We didn't think about it. I mean, that was the answer. One of the people who was on the committee. And maybe the same thing's happened here. They want to address this hit and run situation, but they don't really stop and think, okay, let's do the numbers on this. We still have incentivized leaving the scene because we've said, oh, well, you're still better off to go ahead and leave because if we catch you, you're going to face more time. The answer would have been, it's the same penalty if you leave or stay if you're drunk, and that way you might as well stay and at least not look like someone who absolutely so cold-hearted that you're going to leave Connie Blunt in the middle of the street to die when you could have stopped to help her or called help for her, because that's what we see with these hit-and-run collisions. You're right, most of these people are drunk. Why else would they leave? Of course, we also have a problem with people who are here illegally. A lot of times they don't want to stay either. And we run into that too, so people have different reasons to leave the scene. But we have to take away that incentive and give them incentive to stay, right?
Well, right now, the penalty ought to be at least the same for in this case, the manslaughter, second degree, and leaving the scene. It ought to be the same penalty, but right now it isn't, and so it shouldn't surprise us that people hit a pedestrian and leave the scene. So that's something that I believe the legislature ought to pay attention to, although they may not, because that will, guess what, that may very well require people to go to prison, and they don't want to send people to prison. But another one of the legislative guffaws is this idea that manslaughter in the second degree isn't a violent offense. Mm-hmm. So we beat that to death.
Yeah, along with attempted murder, that's not considered to be a violent offense either with our current laws here in Kentucky. Street code of silence. You say that's affecting our what we call our homicide clearance rate. That's obviously a police term. And what that means is a police investigator, when you're assigned so many cases for everyone that you quote-unquote clear, you make an arrest and you send up to the prosecutor, then you've cleared that case. It's not over. The person still has to be convicted.
Solving versus unsolved.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
But the street code of silence, because unlike what you see on CSI, it's very rare for you to solve a homicide through DNA or physical evidence. That can contribute to it, but most often it's talking to people, it's witnesses, it's just good old-fashioned police investigative work.
Legwork.
And then you use the physical evidence and from a scene to help to basically back up what you've already learned through talking to people and getting information.
Well, I call it incident blindness. What happens too often is that a group of people may be around, or some people are around the minute some sort of a shooting or a murder occurs. Guess what? They all become blind and didn't see anything. And there's this mentality that I think really started in Baltimore. There was this "Don't Snitch" campaign. Remember that? Mm-hmm. There was all sorts of this. Even this NBA guy named Carmelo Anthony appeared on a CD or a video or one of those things in which it was a "Don't Snitch" kind of a hip hop song. And since then he's been trying to recover from that. But that mentality began, or that campaign kind of began in Baltimore, and it's Detroit solves about 30% of their homicides.
Tune in to the following stations every Sunday to hear full episodes of In Touch with Ray the DA and Don Evans.